Garcia.
Jackie Gilbert. And we are 5 seniors in public policy who have been working on providing this report this quarter. So our report is entitled Conserving Water, Conserving Cash, Agency-Specific Strategies for Water Conservation. And a brief overview of kind of roadmap where we're going with this presentation today. We'll be starting out with just a general introduction to our client, the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. And we'll follow that with our research question. After that, we'll go into a pretty brief demographic overview of BOSCA and its member agencies, followed by our cost effectiveness and demographic analyses. And we'll conclude with a case study and also some recommendations of where BOSCA should go next. So as I mentioned, our client is the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, and also known as BOSCA. And BOSCA's mission is twofold, which is kind of embedded into the two names into its title. So BOSCA was created in 2003 by a California Assembly Bill 2058, and its mission is both on the water conservation side, so it coordinates the water conservation efforts of its 24 member water agencies shown here, as well as 2 private utilities companies. But it also looks at the supply side. So it helps these member agencies collectively negotiate with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission to gain access to the regional water supply water at a fair price and with reliability. And this is a very important service that it provides to its constituents. As you can see, the first graph up here shows the water supply for its constituents, and 66% of that water supply comes from SFRWS, with the rest coming primarily from groundwater and other sources. And on the demand side, BOSCA's water agency is primarily residential, with 60% of its water demand being created by residential users, and the other 15% by commercial users. So with that, I will, and the question that we're going to be seeking to answer through this report is how can BOSCA help their water agencies design water conservation initiatives that are both cost-effective and targeted to the specific demographics of their constituents. And in order to answer that question, we asked 3 sub-questions. The first is, what are the water conservation programming that BOSCA is doing now, and are they cost-effective? The second question is, how does participation in conservation programs vary with demographic factors? And finally, we asked through what mechanisms does demographic factors affect program participation? So with that, I will hand it over to Jackie to talk a bit about the data sources.
To support a lot of the research, we had to use a variety of data sources, mostly coming from BOSCA itself. We used their water conservation report, their conservation database, which is essentially a gigantic spreadsheet. We outsourced to Orange County's master plan, the Environmental Protection Agency's water source, so on. For our demographic analysis, we use Simply Maps and Census.gov. Simply Maps is basically an online database of demographic statistics, and they use the American Community Survey estimates and the census to compile these maps. We also use BOSCA's annual surveys and National Oceanic and Atmospheric Center for Environmental Information data. That's for our climate. Moving on to the demographics, we use ArcMap to map demographics we thought were important to our research. This includes population density. So this is the population of 2008, the density specifically. So we'd see less of a population density in the outer areas of the Bay Area. And then moving on to 2014, you'll see a gigantic boom, mostly in the East Bay. Look at that. One more time. This is the racial density in 2008. So as you can see, it's an incredibly diverse area that we're working with. And then this is for, oh, sorry, didn't show. That's weird. But anyway, in 2014, you see a lot of increased Asian population density in the East Bay. So all this empty area is pretty much dotted with Asian population. You also see a significant increase in the Hispanic density, Hispanic population density. Moving on to tenure. So tenure is the proportion of renters' occupied units to occupied units. We see a lot of renter in the South Bay, a lot in South San Francisco, and a lot in the East Bay, kind of around Hayward. For college graduates, unsurprisingly, this little red is us at Stanford. And then
You're not
around
graduates.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a highly educated population right here. So this is Los Altos, Sunnyvale. Then up there we have Hillsborough. And here's unemployment. Unsurprisingly, it's pretty similar to the education map. Moving on to Spanish speakers. Spanish speakers are in green, so be careful when your eyes are adjusting. Obviously, less of a Spanish-speaking population on the outer limits. And then around here, kind of around Fremont. Moving on to median household income. Everyone's doing pretty well except for this little part. And that is basically, well, the highest income we see is in Cowwater Bear Gulch. So that's around here. And we also see it in Prisma Hills, which is Los Altos, and Hillsborough as well.
So the first part of our analysis was a cost-effectiveness analysis. And basically we analyzed every program that we could, their cost-effectiveness by individual agency. In the past, BOSCA has done this as a collective for all of BOSCA, but as to our knowledge, not broken it out by agency. So in order to do this, we needed to determine from the resources BOSCA gave us both the total cost of the program and the total water savings that each program accrued. So we determined the cost by the cost per saving an acre foot of water. If a program costs $200 and saves 2 acre feet of water, we considered that to be $100 per acre foot. And a program was considered cost effective if it was less than the wholesale price of water that BOSCA and its agencies would need to purchase from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, which this past year, as well as the past couple of years, has been $1,276 per acre foot of water. The programs that we were ultimately able to include in this analysis were these 7. So the high efficiency toilet rebate, high efficiency washer rebate, turf replacement rebate, large landscape survey, school education program, ET controller rebate, and the Prerinse spray nozzle. For the first 2 programs, the toilet and the washer rebates, we used many of BOSCA's pre-existing assumptions from their 2012-13 water conservation report in order to calculate water savings. However, a factor in those assumptions was household size, and instead of using just a flat household size for all of BOSCA's agencies, they had used 2.6. We decided to differentiate it by agency by each individual year. And this ends up having a big effect on both water savings and ultimately cost effectiveness. And as we can see, there's quite a bit of range with the agencies. We have several that have pretty small average household sizes at less than 2.5, all the way up to East Palo Alto, which actually has close to 4 people per household. And so this is what we ultimately got for our results for the cost effectiveness of the toilet rebate. And just to reiterate, the toilet rebate was basically residential accounts. If they upgraded to a high efficiency toilet, they could submit for a rebate up to a certain amount. And here the blue, red, and gold lines represent groupings of agencies based on household size. And so the cost of the program is on the axis over there, and we can see that it's been a highest cost, so least cost effective for the agencies that are in the blue group, which is less than 2.5 people per household, and then most cost effective for the agencies that have a higher average household size, which is the gold line. However, it has, the cost has decreased for all agencies over time, and this correlates with the decreasing rebate amount. So in 2009, there was an average rebate amount of about $132, and in 2014, it's gone down to an average of $99. We have a similar graph for our washer rebate. Here in this graph, the purple line is actually a 4th group of agencies, and actually it's just East Palo Alto because they are such an outlier in their average household size. And we can see that this program has been most cost effective for East Palo Alto over time, both due to that high household size and also because they have a pretty low rebate amount. And the green line here represents the wholesale price of water. So we can see that it's been technically cost effective for all agencies over time. Here is the turf replacement rebate, similar to the other 2 programs, except instead of they're replacing turf and upgrading to either hardscape, so that doesn't need water, or water efficient plants. And this program started out pretty cost effective, expensive but still technically cost effective in 2010. And then we can see it actually becomes cost ineffective by 2013, and this is largely because the rebate amount has been increasing and increased from about 75 cents per square foot to $1.50 per square foot, which ends up adding up. And This was because they wanted to increase participation and probably were feeling a lot more pressure because of the drought, getting in the worst stages of the drought, and so they probably weren't as concerned about costs there. And it's also important to recognize that it's actually just a couple agencies that are really driving the high costs over time. Here, each of the bars represent the average cost of the program for each individual agency. And so we can see over time, from 2010 to 2015, it's really only 5 agencies that have been particularly costly for this program. And this is either due to a high rebate amount, as mentioned, or high administrative costs, or a combination of both.
Awesome. So moving on to the school education program. There are actually several different school education programs that BOSCA conducts, but the main one we were focused on was the WaterWise kits. So they'll hold a school assembly for elementary, middle school, or high school age children, then give them a water audit to do on their home, and then they give them these little devices to lower the flow rate on faucets, for example. And so we can take the water savings based on BOSCA's assumptions, which assume a 60% installation rate, 15-year lifespan. And so what we did when we just threw the numbers in to begin with, it appeared as if the program was very not cost effective. As you can tell right here, again, here's the wholesale price of water, of an acre foot of water, and this is the average cost of the program. Down here in this gold bar, we took basically the minimum amount, the minimum cost for the program by any one agency for that year. So we just wanted to show that while we can't expect every agency to perform at that level every single year, that there is potential for this program to be cost effective. And actually what we found out was if we took out Estero, which is one of the water agencies, that was a huge outlier and it actually brings it down. So the program actually is relatively cost effective, hitting at or about that 1276 per acre foot watermark for the whole time between 2010 and 2015, except for the first year, which we assume is due to startup costs. Moving over here, we can see again, this tells the story of how Estero was spending, we're not sure if it's a reporting error, but if it's not, then they were spending an incredible amount of money to educate very few children, just a couple hundred kids. They're spending tens of thousands of dollars.
Where is Estero?
East Bay, further up, getting near Hayward. And then we can see that most of the agencies were very cost effective with this program, and it's just a few other ones. Estero is really crazy, but there's still some like North Coast and the Cal Water agencies that are spending more than they need to for this program. Moving on to the large landscape survey, which determined water savings by calculating the amount of water used by those accounts before the survey and those adjustments, and then versus after. And as we can see, again, this for across all years and agencies, on average, this program was very cost effective, coming in at only about $400, $450 per acre foot of water saved. And so there's a lot of potential for large landscape survey. Especially because it appears most programs aren't participating, or at least from the reporting we were getting. Most agencies did not report either cost savings, either the costs or the water savings together for the program, and so we were unable to include them in the analysis. So this is just an analysis of the 3 Cal Water agencies, Hayward and Hillsborough. And again, if this is not due to a reporting error, we really want to find out what Hayward's doing to make it so cost effective, and imitate that across agencies. Again, BOSCA has about 26 member agencies, so there are a lot of agencies that could be benefiting from this large landscape survey. Kind of moving on to the ET controller rebate, which is a sprinkler system, automatic sprinkler system. We can see, again, some startup issues in the beginning, but even then, incredibly cost effective. This is coming in at $150 per acre foot of water saved. And so this program also has a lot of room to grow. It has a very low saturation rate across all the agencies. Moving on to the most cost-effective program that BOSCA has is the Prerinse spray nozzle program, which is a commercial program, so not residential. And this is mostly for restaurants that use it to clean dishes. And what we did is we went back and we found from the National Restaurant Association, found that these are used about an hour per day, typically have like a 15-year lifespan. And so we calculated how much water that would save. And this is actually a very conservative estimate because we assumed a relatively efficient original nozzle that the restaurants were using. In reality, they were probably using one that wasn't that efficient. And even then, as you can see, this is incredibly cost effective, coming out to I think $40 or $50 per acre foot of water saved. And in part, this is because there's very little, if any, risk involved. There isn't the risk you're going to hold a public information class or a school assembly and kids aren't going to do the kits, or people aren't going to apply for the rebate program. This is just giving any restaurant that wants it, dispersing an efficient nozzle for them to use. Looking at all the programs together, on the cost effectiveness side at least, here we've ranked them by lowest cost per acre foot of water conserved to the highest cost per acre foot of water conserved. And as you can see, the most effective have been the Prerinse spray nozzle, ET controller, and washer. Many of the residential ones tend to rank high as well. And over here on the right, not correlated or not factored into the ranking per se, we have the saturation rate for those programs. We were only able to calculate those for residential, and that's because we were taking the total number of single-family residents and multifamily residence accounts that participated in the program from 2010 to 2015, and then dividing that by the total number of accounts in that agency. But as you can see, not one of the programs is even close to being fully saturated. The closest is the washer program, which is only at 16%. And some of these, including the turf replacement and ET controller, are actually less than 1% of the accounts have actually been taking advantage of this program. So there's still a ton of potential for water savings with these programs, very cost-effective water savings. And so now we'll move on to demographic analysis.
So for the second component of our analysis, we were interested in answering the question of what demographic factors for each agency are driving conservation in these different subscription programs. And in Bosca's 2014 to 2015 final summary, they actually use an econometric analysis to estimate their future water demand. And it's important to have a sense of how demographics influence participation in these conservation efforts in order to have Bosca better estimate future water demand. If it's the case that demographic factors do affect participation rates, Bosca might actually be underestimating water demand in their agency area. And the demographic analysis will also serve a second purpose in that subscription programs which better match their member agency demographic profile will just be more effective at driving conservation behavior. So to answer this question, we ran an ordinary least squares regression for 7 of the subscription programs throughout the 2000 to 2015 time period. And looking at our data, we had data from the 2000 survey and onward from 2008 to 2015, leading to a gap of missing data from 2001 to 2007, which we filled in using interpolation, using a line of best fit to make our best guess as to what the data for these different agencies were. And we clustered standard errors by agency in order to make the significance of our results more robust. So our preliminary model that we used to estimate participation behavior for each of these 7 subscription programs across the agencies are participation per capita, which is measured by participants or number of rebates issued per program, over the number of single-family and multifamily accounts for each program. And median income for each agency as the explanatory variables, the percentage white for each agency, along with percentage black and percentage Hispanic, the percentage renter rate, or how many homeowners rent their homes instead of own them, the percentage of each agency that holds at least a college degree, and the water price of each agency, along with the year since implementation that each program has been in place for each agency, and the climate as measured by the Palmer Drought Severity Index. So going to our results, when we first ran this model for each of these 7 subscription programs, we found that median income had an insignificant effect for each subscription program. For the renter rate, we found that there was actually a positive effect between the renter rate and participation in each program, which initially surprised us because going into this analysis, we thought that renters would be less likely to participate in these programs, being that they don't own their homes, they might not even have the capacity to change their lawns or an incentive to do so. But after doing some further research, we actually found that it might be the case that that landowners have an incentive to participate in these programs because they can't change price because of locked-in contracts for water utility bills. For education rate, we found a mixed effect between the programs, and likewise we found mixed effects for the percentage white and percentage black for each agency. However, for the Hispanic population, we actually found consistent negative effects in participation rate. And for water price, we also found a negative effect. So for higher water prices, we find a decrease in participation rates, which also surprised us, but this might be the case in the way that we actually measured water price, which was the average water bill for each agency over the average water consumed measured in CCF. So there might be an issue of simultaneous causality, which we eliminate in a follow-up regression. For climate, we also found negative consistent effects across each of the subscription programs. So as the drought severity index increases, the drought gets worse, there's more public concern over the drought, and people are more likely to participate in these conservation programs. For unemployment, we likewise found negative effects. So as an agency's unemployment rate increases, people are less likely to participate in these conservation programs because of concern of cost or other priorities in their lives.
Can you go back to, so I think
Yeah.
I couldn't understand the sign on the climate one.
Oh, the climate. So as the drought severity index decreases and the drought gets worse,
Oh, the severity index decreases.
right,
Okay.
so
All right.
lower number for the,
Explain, sorry.
yeah, so lower number for the drought severity index indicates a worse drought.
Okay,
The negative.
yeah. So, okay.
Yeah, and years since implementation, we also found mixed effects. So off of this first regression results, we really focused in on the Hispanic rate and thought that language, or that the language barrier between BOSCA and its member agencies might actually be driving participation effects. So we ran a second regression, taking out the percentage white and percentage black, and also eliminating years since implementation, which Kate will talk about.
Yeah, so based on the learnings from our first regression, as Corey mentioned, we took out our racial variables and replaced it with a linguistic variable because based on the mixed effects of white and black, but the consistent negative effects of Hispanic, we suspected that language rather than race might actually be driving participation in these programs. We also eliminated the water price variable because the way that we measured water price, because of tiered pricing system, actually encapsulates both conservation behavior and amount of water usage or how much the agencies are charging. So when people are using less water, that's also using less expensive water and therefore decreasing the water price. So we eliminated that variable due to concerns about simultaneous causality. And took out years since implementation because it had mixed effects that were actually only significant at the 10% level. And the results that we see here is actually median income now starts to see a very negative relationship with program participation, which Jackie will talk a little bit about a little bit more further in her qualitative analysis. But we primarily suspect that at the upper echelons of the income distribution in places like Hillsborough, people either are impervious to water price increases, so they just don't care about using that much more water, or might be upgrading their water, upgrading their like washer or toilet, but not even bothering to turn in the rebate. Renter continues to see a positive relationship, as Corey explained earlier. Education now sees an almost consistent positive relationship with program participation. And as Corey mentioned, that variable is defined as the percent of people who have graduated from post-secondary education in an agency in a given year. And so we suspect that post-secondary education instills some sort of conservation attitudes and mindsets in those who graduate from it, which manifests in increased program participation, except for the ET controller program was the one exception there. Climate continues to see a negative relationship, so as the Palmer Drought Severity Index drops for the state of California, program participation rises. Unemployment sees a negative, mainly insignificant, but a negative relationship with the ET controller participation, showing that as the economy worsens, people's priorities, there's likely a crowding of priorities where conservation might get deprioritized to other things like a job search process or meeting your basic necessities. And then finally, we see consistent negative results, negative correlation between program participation and percentage in an agency in a given year whose first language is Spanish, which Jackie will talk a little bit more about the mechanisms through which in her qualitative analysis.
So for the qualitative analysis, we wanted to explore what the numbers could not tell us. The main method that we employed was phone interviews with managers of these conservation programs, specifically in East Palo Alto, which is governed by American Water, and in Prisma Hills, which is the water distributor for Los Altos. So for East Palo Alto, the manager described the constituents as price sensitive, presumably because they are on the lower median income levels. So they tend to react to water rate increases more quickly. Last July, American Water increased their prices by 28%, and residents responded, very well. And this, in turn, he thinks this is what drives conservation behavior and participation in water programs, but their participation is still a little bit lacking. They also have a high density area, so they have an area of 3.6 square miles and about 38,000 residents. Families have more children, as you saw in the median household size chart, and so they have about 7 to 10 people living in some houses even. And then smaller lots require less landscape maintenance, and that's why they would use less water. To better serve their Spanish customers, they have their bills and conservation notices in both English and Spanish, and they've hired customer representatives that speak both Spanish and English. As for Prisma Hills, the manager there largely described the constituents as less communal, mainly because they're able to afford houses all over the world, and they don't really have community values. Their water prices, she said that they might not even see their water bills, largely because they can afford to pay any price. In turn, this kind of obviously contrasts the price sensitivity we see in East Palo Alto. As for their landscape program, they have a landscape requirement that limits watering their lawns to twice a week. They've informed the homeowners of this, but it's not getting to the actual gatekeepers of this water. The gatekeepers being the landscapers that they employ. A lot of these landscapers are Spanish speakers and only Spanish speaking, and so there's a language barrier that Prisma Hills has yet to address. Actually, they did address it. They distributed pamphlets that were intended for these landscapers so that homeowners can give them to their landscapers and learn more about what they're saying when they say stop, stop, stop. They don't know the effects of the program exactly, but they found out this whole problem by employing a conservation specialist in the field. And moving on to our recommendations, that is why we recommend to investigate meeting effects of demographics. As we saw with our interviews with those two water managers of the very different water districts, there's a lot to be learned from the water managers themselves. So BOSCA can examine the meeting effects of the demographics. For example, we have notions as to why education is important for increasing participation in conservation programs. We think that there may be some behavioral changes in college, but we can't be too sure. So we suggest that BOSCA employ surveys both to constituents and to the higher level water agency conservation program administrators. That way we can get their insights as to what they think the conservation program barriers are so that BOSCA can address them, and to get the constituents' attitudes and behaviors.
Okay, so for our second recommendation, we really build off that first one, and once they gain this qualitative information through surveys on the mediating effects of demographics, we suggest that BOSCA and their agencies scale the cost-effective programs they already have through targeted advertising, using that information, and really targeting those demographics that we identified as having lower participation. So once again, as you can see, this table again, BOSCA has many cost-effective programs, several of which we have identified as having very low saturation rates. So there's a lot of potential. And in particular, we suggest that BOSCA and its agencies really try to target their residential washer and toilet rebate programs toward the agencies and the residents that have high percentage of Hispanic or Spanish speaking, including East Palo Alto, Cal Water, South San Francisco, and Hayward. And this is not only because they have lower participation, but also because we saw that these agencies also have high average household size, and we saw that for the toilet rebate and the washer rebate, the average household size really makes a difference with the cost effectiveness. So we think that that offers a great opportunity to both increase cost effectiveness and water conservation. And then going back here, the ET controller rebate and the turf replacement rebate, we really think that BOSCA should try to scale these, and these are both outdoor water use conservation programs, which correlates, as we saw, with some of the higher income agencies, such as Hillsborough and Parisima Hills. And so we think that they should, once learning those mediating effects, find a way to really promote those programs within these high median income agencies. The ET controller rebate is already very cost effective, so not many changes need to be made there. And the turf replacement, while it's been more costly, that's largely because they've been trying to increase the participation with the higher rebate amount, and if they instead maybe focus their efforts through targeted advertising, they might even be able to bring that rebate amount down to its original level while still increasing participation and thus water conservation. Those are just some sub-recommendations, but the main idea is to really use those mediating effects to create targeted advertising for their cost-effective programs.
And then just finally, overall, just improving data reporting. We had several issues when we were compiling the data, actually comparing the data across agencies for a couple of reasons. First, a lot of agencies were using, there's a final column on the right that says comments, and a lot of agencies were using that to qualify the numbers they had actually put in. So saying, well, we counted this, or we assumed this, which was helpful to find out what that one agency did, but incredibly difficult to compare the actual numbers that were reported across, hundreds of Excel cells. Finally, we need to make more boxes required responses. There were plenty of agencies that weren't reporting anything for either costs or water savings, which made comparing the programs impossible for those agencies in those years. Properly separating programs, as we mentioned before, the school education programs actually had 3 or 4 other random programs thrown in that are also school education, but weren't comparing the water-wise kits, and so that kind of compromised the integrity of some of our analysis there. Finally, making sure the exact models of the devices you're replacing are reported, or at least guesstimated, and same with what you're putting in. So a lot of times we didn't even know what they were replacing, if it just listed heavy equipment or a certain washer. There are lots of different types of washer, again with the Prerinse spray nozzle program. So we didn't really know how much water they were saving because they weren't reporting it and they weren't giving us the tools to calculate that. Finally, track or separate administrative costs. Lots of agencies were just using one giant, saying we didn't separate among programs, which makes sense, but then they were reporting that same administrative cost for every single program, which obviously made things look less cost effective, and or they weren't tracking them at all, which we know there were some admin costs involved with some of these programs. And we think a lot of these programs, or a lot of these problems could be solved just by fixing the reporting sheet to make more boxes required, and then just better agency training. If they just show them these results and show them the Excel file that they collect and show them exactly what happens when they don't fill it in, we think that there will be better responses, and or not allowing them to submit them if they're not filled in properly. And that is it. So again, just investigate mediating effects demographics, scale the cost-effective programs targeted to those demographics once they've done more research, and then improving data reporting. That's it.